Running back injuries are the story this week, and they're about to control your league's waiver run. Which high ceiling options remain available in your league? Who presents the most upside for the rest of the season? And who just might be ready to win you week 9? We're hitting all that and more in an all new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Matt Schauf and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to get you set for your Week 9 waiver wire runs. We'll hit a couple of young wide receivers. We'll talk some streaming options at quarterback and team defense, but we're kicking this off with some key running back situations, including, Jared, one that developed today. Isiah Pacheco is dealing with an MCL sprain coming out of Monday night's win over Washington, and that might be an injury that a lot of people missed because it happened very late in what wound up being a one-sided victory for the Chiefs. It's an MCL sprain. He's, according to Tom Pelissero, he's week to week right now. That usually means a guy is going to miss at least one game. So it seems like we should expect Pacheco to miss week 9. And that could make Kareem Hunt like a week maker, right?
Yeah, I think, memory wiped how busy Kareem Hunt was in those games without Isiah Pacheco last year. So Hunt played 8 games without Pacheco last year. In those games, 59% snap rate, 19.4 carries per game, 2.8 targets per game. He was the RB3 in expected PPR points per game over that 8-game stretch. RB19 in actual PPR points per game. He was inefficient all around. The yards per carry was ugly. He was bad. He was bad at converting like goal line carries into touchdowns as well. So that's why he kind of lagged in terms of the expected stuff. Now you remember that Chiefs offense, it was running more because Rashee Rice was out. Xavier Worthy hadn't really done anything yet. So you're not going to get that type of workload for Kareem Hunt, but I do think, I don't think they're ready to give Brashard Smith a big rushing role. He'll get more carries with Isiah Pacheco out, continue to control most of the, targets in the backfield. But I think Kareem Hunt's going to get the vast majority of the carries this week. And they play Buffalo this week, who's one of the bigger, run funnel defenses in the NFL. It's been a run D that struggled all year. They were better last week against Carolina, but they also lost Ed Oliver in that game, one of their best interior defenders. So it's a good matchup for Kareem Hunt. He somewhat unfortunately sits, pretty high inside the top 20 in our week 9 running back ranking. So if you're looking for a short-term running back ad, I do think Kareem Hunt is your best bet on waiver wires this week.
Yeah, a strong option for week 9 because of that matchup that you just mentioned. Already got plenty of usage last night, even with Pacheco around for most of that game. So I agree. It looks like he should be well ahead of Brashard Smith. I'm sure there will be some more work for Brashard Smith, but it doesn't look like they're ready to give him a whole lot. So we should get something at least close to Kareem Hunt as a workhorse in that prime matchup this coming week. And I mean, it is week to week for Pacheco. So we're talking about week 9, but it's certainly possible that Hunt is, startable into week 10. And then we'll see beyond that as we see just how injured Pacheco's knee is and maybe how Kareem Hunt performs while Pacheco is out. So Pacheco's good pickup this week. And if you're like, yeah, Pacheco's been rostered in my league forever, he was available in 60% of Yahoo leagues entering this. Also plenty available on Sleeper ahead of this show. So he's out there for plenty of folks. Make sure that you check just to confirm whether Kareem Hunt is available this week instead of just assuming. Before that Pacheco injury, of course, probably the biggest running back injury of the weekend is Cam Skattebo dislocating an ankle in that loss to the Eagles. You hate to see that because it's been a fun rookie season for Skattebo. He's obviously done for the year now, and that means that we have to pay some attention to Tyrone Tracy, right, Jared?
For sure. You're going to see Tracy take over as the clear leader in this backfield. It's a case where Tracy's role might be better the rest of the way than Skattebo's was, because Tracy was, playing some, kind of spelling Skattebo. I don't think Devin Singletary is going to play as much as Tyrone Tracy was. So even in that game last week, after Cam Skattebo exited, Tyrone Tracy handled 7 carries and 2 targets to just 2 carries and 1 target for Devin Singletary. That seems like a pretty reasonable split to project for these two guys going forward. Tyrone Tracy played 78% of the Giants' offensive snaps after Cam Skattebo left. That's a really strong number for a running back. And remember, we saw Tyrone Tracy in a role like this last year from week 7 on, with Devin Singletary healthy for all these games. Tracy averaged 13.2 carries and 3.5 targets per game. He was RB28 in expected PPR points per game, RB23 in actual PPR points per game. I think that's the level you treat him as, a low end running back 2. Not expecting big efficiency in this offense or big touchdown totals, but the volume's going to be there for him, and it's going to make him a decently high floor weekly fantasy play.
Yeah, probably not even going to do as much as Cam Skattebo has been doing with the work in that backfield. I mean, that's why he's playing behind Cam Skattebo, because the Giants showed us with their actions that they like Skattebo better as a runner and a receiver so far. But lots of work available, an offense that's certainly better with Jackson Dart in there. And similar to Kareem Hunt, it might seem like Tyrone Tracy's got a home in a lot of leagues. He was available in just 51% of Yahoo leagues as of Tuesday morning, but available in 65% of leagues on Sleeper. So plenty of opportunities where Tyrone Tracy might be available to running back needy rosters right now. He should be rostered everywhere. He's not going to be a lock for weekly fantasy starter status because of that offense that's, still iffy overall, but mid running back 2 territory in our rankings this week. Fine matchup against San Francisco. We'll see exactly what the workload looks like, but should be the clear leader both on the rushing and backfield receiving front. The Cardinals made things a bit more interesting in their backfield this week by releasing Michael Carter on Monday. And then on Tuesday came the report that they're going to re-sign Michael Carter. So it doesn't seem as though Arizona wants to be done with Michael Carter. It seems like they had some roster maneuvering that they had to do, and we're like, yeah, we'll go ahead and dump Michael Carter today, pick him back up tomorrow. I don't think it meaningfully changes the backfield hierarchy in that offense, but the fact that Arizona felt okay putting Michael Carter out there on the open market for whatever maneuvers they're making, instead of doing so with Bam Knight, at the very least says to me that we should expect Bam Knight to be the lead back for this high upside matchup with Dallas this week.
Yeah, and we'd already seen that over the last 2 games. Michael Carter, that first game without Trey Benson, was the lead back, but over the 2 most recent Cardinals games, Donovan Knight out-snapped and out-carried Michael Carter in both of those games. The carries, 25-16 over those 2 games, including 14-7 in the Week 7 loss to the Packers. So, Knight doubled Carter up in carries in that game. Even in the passing game, Knight pretty much pulled even with Carter in pass routes last game. It was 33% of the routes for Michael Carter, 30 for Bam Knight. Knight actually out-targeted Carter 4-2 in that game. So Knight clearly the best option here. I do think Carter's going to remain involved, and even Carter kind of snuck into like low end RB3 flex territory in our week 9 rankings because of this matchup against Dallas. This game has a 54-point over under, highest of the week, might be the highest of the season so far. Cardinals are implied for 25.5 points. Dallas is 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back. So it's not a, comfortable backfield to bet on, but based on what we've seen from the Cowboys run defense, there's going to be fantasy points scored by these Cardinals running backs.
Yeah, no one's actually exciting here, but they're probably going to be more relevant than they should be because of the matchup with Dallas this week. Amari DiMercado is probably worth some attention in deeper leagues this week, but we're going to have to see both about his health and about Michael Carter's actual status as we move further into week 9. Elsewhere in the backfields, we got Saquon Barkley after a big day, leaving early with a groin injury in that win over the Giants. We had Quinshon Judkins injuring a shoulder in Sunday's loss to the Patriots, leaving that game early. So we got some work from Tank Bigsby and Dylan Sampson. Now, Jared, both of these teams have week 9 buys, so there's no immediate value boost to anybody here. And we've got some time for Barkley and Judkins to potentially get better. So my assessment here is that Barkley's injury doesn't seem to be serious. I would expect that he'll be ready for full work come week 10. We'll certainly see on the other side of the bye about that. What do we know about Judkins so far, though?
Yeah, his injury sounds relatively minor as well. Kevin Stefanski called him day-to-day. Like you said, Matt, he has the bye week. So I think we're tentatively expecting him to be ready come week 10. Now, shoulder injury for a running back is something that can get re-aggravated. You land on it wrong one time, you can re-injure it and miss time. So and of course, a groin injury can be tricky. So I think Tank Bigsby and Dylan Sampson are worth stashing where you have room because they're, it seems closer at this point than they were a week ago to, having roles. After Judkins left that game last week, Dylan Sampson had 3 carries and 6 targets. Jerome Ford had 0 carries and 1 target. And that's kind of what we saw back in week 1, too, before Judkins made his NFL debut. Sampson out-carried Ford 12-6 in that week 1 game and out-targeted him 8-1. So we've now seen on 2 different occasions that, when Judkins is out, Dylan Sampson is the guy you want in this Browns backfield. So he's the stash there. And then it looks like it's Tank Bigsby in Philadelphia, who he got 7 carries after after Saquon Barkley exited, just 2 for Will Shipley, 0 for A.J. Dillon, who was active for this game, didn't end up playing at all. So, in Philadelphia, I would expect Shipley to mix in and probably play most of the passing downs if Barkley misses time. But I think Tank Bigsby would, control the early down work based on what we saw in that game and how he performed in that game. He was really productive against the Giants. So I think Bigsby's the guy I would lean to in Philadelphia, but Shipley probably worth stashing too in deeper leagues, especially full PPR.
And even though these injuries are minor, like you said, Jared, it just takes, one more awkward shot to whatever the affected area is for that guy to be knocked out of the game. So, if you're hitting the waiver wire this week and you're not in immediate need, or if you just get outbid for those other guys, think about stashing Tank Bigsby, Dylan Sampson, some other handcuff type of running back while the rest of your league is not necessarily focused on those guys. Because when you get ahead of your league and stash these players, you don't have to fight the rest of the league for Tyrone Tracy or Kareem Hunt or whoever the, elevated handcuff is that particular week. If you're not in need of running back help, maybe you're looking at wide receiver. And if that's the case, you should probably look at Troy Franklin, who's coming off a season best 6 catches, 89 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the Cowboys. That Cowboys matchup that's season best for a whole lot of players this season. Second straight week for Franklin and 4th time this year that he has drawn 8+ targets. The role has been good. The target counts, the production have fluctuated. I would expect that to continue, Jared, but Troy Franklin looks holdable and usable in kind of deep wide receiver 3 territory for the long term to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I would definitely say be careful not to overrate last week because it was Dallas. But, we talked about Franklin on the week 8 preview show, calling him, a sneaky start in this matchup. And it was because of the matchup, but also because Franklin's role has been nice all season. He now trails Courtland Sutton by just 2 targets on the season, 19% target share for Troy Franklin. And he's actually beating Courtland Sutton in expected PPR points per game, 12.6 to 11.9. That's 27th best among all wide receivers for Troy Franklin. A lot of that has to do with his red zone role. He's leading the Broncos in targets inside the red zone, targets inside the 10-yard line. So it's been a nice role for him. The one thing I would say with Franklin is the Broncos have the 5th toughest remaining wide receiver schedule according to our adjusted fantasy points allowed. That starts with Houston this week, who's a really tough matchup for wide receivers. The Broncos also still play the Chiefs twice in both week 11 and week 17. So fantasy championship week for most leagues. So the schedule is not going to help Franklin here. But again, like you said, Matt, the role is good enough to where, he can be a wide receiver 3 for you, a really nice wide receiver 4 or flex type of play.
Yeah, I would try not to use him this week against Houston. Next week against the Raiders certainly could be a good spot. We'll see about that first matchup with the Chiefs in week 11, then a week 12 bye. After that, matchups with the Commanders and the Raiders could also be usable spots. So Troy Franklin will be a fine guy to have around. There will be weeks where you can use him. Chimere Dike is somebody that we suddenly have to talk about. And honestly, Jared, somebody that I would not have expected, 2 weeks ago that we would talk about at all on this show. So week 7 started things. He caught 4 passes for 70 yards after barely making any noise up until that point. But that production came on just 4 targets. He tied for 4th on the team in targets in that game. He ranked 3rd among Titans wide receivers in routes in that game. That all changed this past week, however. 89% snap share for DK in week 8, season high by a wide margin. He passed Van Jefferson in usage. He joined Alec Iomanner as the 2 guys in 2 wide receiver sets for Tennessee. So, that sets up a better role going forward. It also sets up the question of what to do as we get nearer to and then, eventually into Calvin Ridley returning to the field.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm not super excited about Chimere Dike. 1, because Ridley's going to be back, and 2, because I still don't want to be relying on this Titans passing game too much, right? I mean, I will say Cam Ward has played better the last 2 weeks. The fantasy numbers haven't been huge, but he has a 65% completion rate, 7.1 yards per attempt over the last 2 weeks. So that's like, decent NFL numbers versus what he had been doing the previous 5 or 6 games. So, and a lot of that has been Chimere Dike, who has caught 11 of 12 targets over the last 2 weeks. So he's like the only thing working in Tennessee's offense at this point, which is nice. But again, I'm just not super excited about him. I think he's a deep league stash, but if you're having to start him, I think you're kind of in trouble.
I agree. It's more of a stash, more of a long-term thing. I'll say the thing that's changed for me is I assumed at draft time that DK was going to be the one that we didn't hear a whole lot about going forward, and that Iomanner was going to emerge ahead of him. And that, was the case early in the season. So Chimere Dike emerging recently is making me rethink, maybe I should hold out some hope for him long term. Maybe I should keep an eye on him as a dynasty asset and maybe, stash him if he's available somewhere, keep him if I had been thinking about dumping him for something in dynasty, and then just kind of see where we're at heading into next season. And then the one other factor for this year that could be a factor, could not be. Calvin Ridley sure makes sense to me as a trade candidate from a Tennessee team that's going nowhere. The contract might be difficult, but it also looks like it's potentially tradable. So if Calvin Ridley gets traded, maybe we get some weeks going forward where DK is startable in deeper leagues, particularly like a wide receiver 4 spot for PPR. But, for now, really just a stash for a low dollar waiver bid type of player.
Yeah, I feel like we've heard 45 names thrown around as potential trade candidates. I actually haven't heard Calvin Ridley's name, but it would make a ton of sense. I mean, I guess we kind of have heard it because the report has been everyone besides Cam Ward and Jeffrey Simmons are available on the Titans. So I guess Ridley probably is available. I don't know who's going to be interested in him because he hasn't been very good this year and he's hurt.
Let's talk about who might be good this week as opposed to the rest of the year. If you're in need at quarterback, maybe you got Jalen Hurts or Baker Mayfield on bye this week, you might need to stream a quarterback for week 9. Jared, who is your favorite QB streamer for this week?
Yeah, I think tough week to stream quarterbacks this week, but Sam Darnold, I think, is your best bet. He's still available in 2/3 of Yahoo leagues, about 60% of sleeper leagues, coming off the bye week, so maybe that got him dropped in some spots. But Darnold's just been really good this season. He's quarterback 17 in fantasy points per game. That does jump to quarterback 13 since week 2. He had a down week 1. He's been a lot better since then. The volume remains low here. It's a run first Seattle offense, which hurts a bit, but Darnold's been so efficient. 68% completion rate, 9.1 yards per pass attempt, 6.3% touchdown rate. And he gets the Commanders on Sunday night, who are still better against the run than the pass. So maybe that pushes Seattle a bit towards the pass. I think it would help if Jaden Daniels returns for this game, just to, push it, maybe, have the Seahawks playing from behind. But either way, I think in a good matchup, the Commanders are 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. That, Darnold's going to give you a nice floor with maybe some upside for a, top 10 fantasy finish.
Yeah, if Sam Darnold's available, I would go that way as well. Trevor Lawrence at QB 17 in our rankings right now is the highest ranked guy that's available in at least 60% of sleeper leagues. So he could be your fallback if Sam Darnold's not available. Lawrence has gone for 20 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games by our default scoring system. That includes that loss to the Rams across the sea where he completed just 48% of his passes. Lawrence has been better in losses for Jacksonville so far than in victories in terms of putting up fantasy points. Certainly not somebody that you can count on, but if you're in need this week, there's at least some upside, especially with Travis Hunter finally having emerged as a fantasy factor last time we saw them.
For sure. We'll see about Brian Thomas Jr. Coming off the shoulder injury. You obviously want him in there if you're going to start Lawrence.
And of course, I don't think I mentioned they're playing the Raiders. So that's the biggest reason to like anything Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Streaming defenses for week 9, Jared. I think it starts with the Rams against the Saints, who will be tossing out Tyler Shuck for his very first NFL start. Just 34% rostered on Sleeper. So the Rams available in plenty of spaces. Anywhere else you're looking?
Yeah, the Rams are our top ranked defense this week in the week 9 ranking. So if they're available, easy call there. We'll go back to Jacksonville, though. If the Rams are not available, much more available than the Rams are. They're like 2% owned, I think, on Yahoo. So at Vegas for the Jags, they're 3-point favorites in that game. The Raiders implied for just 21 points. Geno Smith, 10 interceptions and 19 sacks through 7 games. And of course, that whatever the Raiders threw out in the field last time out against the Chiefs, 20 plays, just one of the worst offensive performances we've seen in a while. So that makes the Jags a nice week 9 play.
And the Jags aren't a very good defense, but the one thing that they've done well so far this year is take the ball away, and the Raiders love giving the ball away. So that in particular is a nice matchup this week. Week 10, another tough one to find streaming defenses. Jared, who do you like for a week 10 streaming D for anybody looking to get ahead of next week's waiver run?
Yeah, so another reason to grab the Jags is that they get the Texans in week 10, and that remains a good matchup, I think. It's still one of the worst O-lines in the NFL. I know C.J. Stroud is coming off his best game of the season, but I still like that matchup. The Jags defense had 2 sacks and 3 takeaways when they played the Texans back in week 3, so you can use Jacksonville these next 2 weeks. Otherwise, I like the Ravens for week 10. I just think this defense is going to be better now that it's gotten some guys back coming off the bye week. They played well last week against Chicago, and they get Minnesota in week 10. It's going to be JJ McCarthy. It's going to be an offensive line that I'm assuming is still going to be at less than 100%. So I think you can use Baltimore in week 10, despite the fact that they were horrible, for the previous 4 or 5 games before last week.
I don't think it's going to be a good defense still going forward. I think they still lack pass rush. Maybe they'll get healthier in that area, but they did also acquire safety Alohi Gilman, played a 3 safety lineup this past week, have played better lately, and most importantly, that matchup at Minnesota. If JJ McCarthy comes out this week and looks as bad as he did the last time we saw him on the field, then you're going to be battling league mates to try to get the Ravens next week. So you might as well go ahead and stash Baltimore this week, see how JJ McCarthy looks, see how the Baltimore defense fares this week, and then potentially have your starter all set on defense for week 10. You can find more streaming defense options, although not a lot more because it's a tough couple of weeks in that department, and other waiver wire help on draftsharks.com right now. Check the show notes below to get the link to whatever it is that you are looking for, and check your free agent finder to get help finding the best available options in your specific league to fit your specific roster needs. Waiver wire help, of course, just one key way that Draft Sharks is your unfair advantage.